I went out with the fuel gauge already arguing with my orders. Over the bridge the flak walked up my wings, and the margin vanished without warning. I put the Il-2 down on enemy water, knowing the system would count the aircraft before it counted me. In the reeds and cold, I watched their trucks circle the lake like it mattered. October 22nd, 1944. The Murmansk airfield, south of Murmansk, on the Kola Peninsula. A Soviet assault regiment is preparing for another day of short-range strikes across the frontier into northern Norway. In the far north, the war has a different geography. Ports are few, roads are narrow, exposed and easy to cut. Weather can erase a plan in minutes. For Britain, the Arctic route matters because it keeps cargo moving into Soviet hands. To see convoys that survive the Barents Sea feed a front that holds German divisions away from the Channel coast. For the Soviet Union, the same route depends on a single lifeline inland. Trains from Murmansk and Arkhangelsk must reach the front through fragile rail links and limited roads. If that flow breaks, the north becomes isolated. Germany understands that, so the German 20th Mountain Army holds positions in the Arctic as long as it can. It uses Norway's fjords, ports, and airfields as a shield and as a base. Its aircraft strike at coastal traffic. Its forces shelter behind mountain ridges and minefields. Its commanders stock supplies in dispersed dumps because large depots are easy to find and destroy. By late summer 1944, the balance shifts. Finland's exit from the war and Soviet pressure on the Karelian front changes the northern map. German planners begin to prepare for a withdrawal from the far northeast. A retreat in that terrain demands fuel, food, ammunition and transport. It also demands time. The Soviet plan is to take away time. To do that, it must cut bridges, choke roads, and hit the places where retreating columns collect supplies. Every destroyed dump is a delay. Every burned vehicle is a gap in the chain. At Murmansk, the work is repetitive and exacting. Aircraft are patched and rearmed in the open. Engines are warmed against cold air that steals power. Pilots learn to fly to the minute, not just to the kilometre. Fighter cover is scheduled. The rendezvous point is fixed. If a strike package arrives late, it may arrive alone. In that routine, the main character is not yet a legend. He is an officer with a job and a survival record. His name is Aleksandr Chechulin. In 1944, he is a senior lieutenant, commanding a squadron of Il-2 assault aircraft. He has not come to the Arctic to chase personal fame. He has come because units are moved where the state needs them. Chechulin did not begin the war in an Il-2. He first flew fighters. Later, like many pilots, he is reassigned to an aircraft type that is needed more urgently. The Il-2 is built to take punishment, dive through fire, and hit targets that are too small for heavy bombers. It is also heavy, slow to climb, and unforgiving when damaged. In the Arctic, it faces another limitation: range. Targets in northern Norway are not far on a map. In the air, they are far enough to matter. A detour to avoid a defended valley can cost the fuel that would have been the reserve. A headwind can turn enough into barely. Chechulin's squadron operates in pairs and in staggered waves. The first days in the region are not dramatic raids. They are reconnaissance tasks that require straight, predictable flight paths. Photograph the front, photograph trenches, photograph gun pits and mortar sites. Do it low enough to see detail. Do it straight enough to overlap frames. That kind of work is exposed. It invites fire. It also shows how strict timing becomes a survival tool. A typical pass is planned around a meeting with fighters. The assault aircraft must arrive at the front line at the assigned minute so the escort can cover them. Speed is calculated, minutes are counted. A pilot cannot improvise freely when the escort schedule is part of the plan. The Arctic also imposes its own arithmetic. A sortie is limited not just by distance, but by how long the aircraft can loiter over a target. Fuel is not only burned in flight, it is burned in manoeuvres, in climbing back out of valleys and in repeated attack runs. If a mission plan assumes a short time over the objective, the pilot does not have the luxury of staying longer. Chechulin later describes that reality in concrete terms. For some routes, fuel might be sufficient only to reach as far as Tana. Over a target such as Vadsø or Vardø, an Il-2 package might have only minutes to act. The margin depends on load and weather. That is not an exaggeration. It is a statement about the boundaries of the operation. As summer turns to autumn, the pressure increases. Soviet aviation begins to strike deeper targets in Finnmark. Town and port areas are hit. Vehicles on coastal roads are attacked. German flak becomes heavier near the port of Kirkenes, where ships and shore batteries overlap. Kirkenes matters because it is a node. It can supply troops. It can load equipment for evacuation by sea. It can support naval activity along the coast. It can shelter stores and workshops close to the front. Luostari matters as well. It is an airfield area that threatens the Soviet approach. Routes are planned to avoid it until it is neutralized. Every diversion adds minutes, and minutes become fuel. Losses mount. Aircraft do not always return. Sometimes crews return without aircraft. Sometimes aircraft return without crews. A squadron may have 12 aircraft on paper, in practice, and it may have 6 serviceable machines on a given morning. Replacements arrive later. Fuel and ammunition arrive unevenly. In the Arctic, the system is always stretched. Against that background, Soviet ground forces begin their offensive toward Petsamo and Kirkenes. The aim is not only to take ground, it is to push the German frontier line back and to deny Germany the use of the far northeast. The retreat begins before the last battles are over. German columns move west. Bridges are prepared for demolition. Roads become crowded with vehicles, guns, and carts. Supply dumps are scattered along the retreat path to support rearguards. A depot in this setting is not always a concrete warehouse. It may be fuel drums concealed off a road. It may be ammunition in pits under brush. It may be crates stacked in a shallow valley where aircraft cannot easily see them. Such dumps are designed to be invisible from above. They are designed to be found only by those who already know where they are. Soviet pilots are tasked with the opposite, to locate and strike the invisible. In the days before 22nd October, Chechulin's squadron flies repeated attacks. The targets are practical: road convoys, gun positions, port installations. The effect is cumulative rather than spectacular. Each strike forces German units to move at night, to disperse, to spend fuel on detours, and to abandon stores they cannot carry. On 21st October, Chechulin and his gunner, Nikolai Maximenko, are part of a successful attack on Kirkenes and the port. German equipment is being loaded in haste. The objective is to disrupt evacuation and cut supply. The air defences are intense. Ships fire, batteries fire. The approaches are chosen based on where the flak is thinner on that day. The squadron returns. Aircraft are examined. Damage is recorded and patched. Fuel is replenished. Bombs are brought out. The next task is issued. The next day's target is not the port. It is a bridge. The bridge is at Elvenair over the Pacific River. In the geography of the retreat, that crossing matters. It is a point where the road is forced to narrow. If the bridge is dropped, heavy vehicles must slow or detour. Units behind the river are delayed. Columns stack up. A retreat turns into a traffic jam that is visible from the air. The order for the morning of 22nd October is direct. Destroy the bridge, cut the retreat line, force the German group to separate and become vulnerable at Murmashi. The plan is calculated as these plans always are. Takeoff times, escort, altitude, attack direction, exit route. Fuel calculations are part of it. The aircraft are loaded, weather is checked, the time over the objective is limited. If the strike needs repeated runs, it will compete with the fuel needed to return. Chechulin is photographed before the sortie. It is a routine that reflects the way institutions record success and rank. A gunner refuses to be photographed, following a superstition shared by many crews. The men are not modern cynics. They are young officers in a system that has lost many of its friends. Superstition grows where statistical survival feels arbitrary. The aircraft roll and lift. Fighters from Vyenga provide cover. The package heads toward the frontier. From Murmashi to the forward area is not long, but the effective distance is lengthened by routing choices. Avoiding concentrations of flak and fighter bases is not optional. A direct line that crosses a defended zone can become a one-way trip. Over the coast and the river valleys, the geography is constricting. Water and rock channel aircraft toward predictable approaches. That predictability benefits the defenders. Guns can be sighted to cover the valleys. Ships can add their fire from the fjord. The Il-2s descend into their attack profile. The bridge is identified. The approaches are made from directions that enlarge the target in the pilot's view. A pilot does not want to attack across the narrow axis of a bridge. He wants the bridge to fill his sight picture. If he misses, he wants the bombs to fall close enough that blast and fragments still matter. On the run, flak bursts thicken. The Il-2 can take hits, but it cannot ignore them. A hit to control surfaces can end a sortie. A hit to cooling systems can limit engine power. A hit to fuel lines can turn a planned return into an urgent calculation. Chechulin presses the attack. He is not acting out a myth. He is following orders and a practiced method. Release, pull out, exit the fire zone, assess damage, reform if possible. The strike damages the crossing. German withdrawal is not stopped in a single moment, but a bridge does not need to be completely erased to be useful to the attacker. A damaged bridge slows a column. A slowed column is exposed to artillery, to further airstrikes, and to the chaos of retreat. The aircraft turn back towards Soviet-held territory, and now the constraint that shaped the whole day becomes decisive: fuel. The margin was small to begin with. Time over target was limited by design. The aircraft have taken the run they were assigned to take. They are not carrying extra fuel for prolonged detours. They are not guaranteed calm winds on the way home. If an aircraft is damaged, it may burn fuel faster. If it must fly a longer route to avoid fighters or flak, the extra kilometers cost the reserve. If it is forced to climb around terrain, the engine consumes more. Chechulin's aircraft cannot make the return cleanly. The problem is not only that it is hit. The problem is that it was never meant to have much slack. The fuel plan assumes that the sortie is executed within strict minutes. The sortie is not executed within strict minutes. Combat rarely is. A pilot in that position has choices, none of them comfortable. Attempt to push on. I am hoping the calculation is wrong. Ditch into cold sea and risk drowning. Or land in hostile territory and risk capture. Doctrine favours the first. Survival sometimes demands the third. Chechulin chooses a forced landing. In the hills of Jarfjord, near Aleksandr in Serveranga, the Il-2 comes down. It is 22nd October 1944. The aircraft is not landing on a friendly strip. It is landing on water in a region still under German control and under German eyes. The forced landing is not a triumphant event. It is violent and immediate. A heavy aircraft meets water and the edge of ice. The crew survives. The machine is lost. In an ordinary war story, that would be the end of the operational relevance. A pilot survives and later returns. The aircraft becomes a statistic. In the Arctic, a forced landing can become a marker. The lake is not an empty point on a map. It sits near movement routes, near valleys, near tracks used by men and vehicles moving between the coast and the inland. German forces in retreat do not travel with a single, neat column. They move in groups, they stage, they pause, they pull supplies from hidden dumps. The German response to a downed aircraft is predictable. Security units search for crews. Intelligence units try to recover documents. Local commanders want to prevent Soviet capture of anything useful. A downed Il-2 is a reason to send men and vehicles into an area that otherwise might have seen little traffic. In the hours after the landing, German patrol activity increases in the Jarfjord area. For Soviet observers, such activity is information. A place that draws vehicles and guards is rarely meaningless. In a retreat zone, it often indicates a store point. Chechulin and Maximenko leave the wreck area as quickly as they can. They cannot sit near the lake and hope the war passes them by. They are in enemy territory. They are wounded and exhausted. They carry only what they can carry. Cold and wet become as dangerous as a patrol. They move by terrain. They avoid open ground. They watch for roads. They listen for engines. A forced landing in that climate is not only a tactical event, it is a test of endurance. Food is scarce, night is long, any fire would be visible, any careless footprint could be followed. They survive days in the rear area. They do not survive because the enemy is incompetent. They survive because the landscape provides cover and because the German system is strained by retreat. Units are moving, orders are changing, security is uneven. At the same time, the wreck at Aleksandr sits as a fixed point. It can be seen from the air. It can be found again. It becomes, unintentionally, a landmark. In the final days of the Petsamokirkenes fighting, landmarks matter. Soviet ground units are pushing west. German units are attempting to withdraw under pressure while destroying infrastructure. Norwegian civilians are caught in scorched earth measures and forced movements. Along the coast, Allied interest is not abstract. British naval units are present to support the liberation effort. The Northern War is now a shared Allied concern in more than name. Information is passed quickly in such conditions. A report of a downed aircraft is not only about a crew, it is about where the front is fluid. It is about where German units are active. It is about where roads are still functioning. In the Jarfjord sector, the forced landing is linked to another pattern. German vehicles appearing repeatedly in the same area, a cluster of activity that does not fit a simple retreat march, a set of tracks leading away from the main route. That is how concealed depots are often betrayed, not by their physical shape, but by the logistics around them. A German depot in the far north is built to be broken apart, fuel in drums, ammunition in crates, stores in shallow pits. The principle is dispersion. The same principle makes recovery hard when the retreat accelerates. When Soviet patrols and intelligence elements learn of the activity near the lake, they have a choice. Ignore it as a routine search for downed aircrew, or treat it as a sign of something more. They treat it as a sign. In the days that follow, a small German supply dump in the area is located and struck. It is not a massive base. It is a practical cache for vehicles and rearguards. Fuel and ammunition stored there are meant to support movement and defence. Its destruction does not stop the German army alone. It deprives a segment of that army of the resources it expected to have. It is a quiet effect. But in the Arctic, quiet effects accumulate. A shortage of fuel can immobilise a truck. An immobilised truck blocks a road. A blocked road delays a unit. A delayed unit is exposed. Chechulin's forced landing has now done two things at once. It has removed one Il-2 from the order of battle, and it has unintentionally highlighted a spot on the map that draws enemy logistics. That is how a landing can mark a depot. Or Chechulin and Maximenko eventually make their way back. Accounts describe days spent behind enemy lines after forced landings in this campaign. For the men involved, the return is not an adventure. It is a hard movement toward friendly lines, driven by discipline and exhaustion. When Chechulin returns, the system responds in two different voices. One voice is operational. It counts aircraft and sorties and repairs. It needs pilots to fly again. The other voice is institutional. It evaluates loss of equipment. It evaluates decisions made outside direct control. It compares behaviour to doctrine. In Soviet doctrine of the time, a soldier behind enemy lines is expected to resist and avoid capture. The rule is strict, partly because capture can expose information. The rule is also shaped by fear of collapse and panic. It can be harsh even to those who survive. Chechulin's record suggests a pilot with heavy experience and repeated risk. His squadron has taken losses. His missions include deep attacks under intense fire. He is not protected from danger by rank. He flies. Yet the aftermath of the forced landing creates friction. A candidate for high honours can be delayed or blocked by circumstances that do not fit the ideal narrative. Chechulin later explains that he believed his forced landing and the days in enemy territory affected how his case was handled. He also notes that envy and bureaucracy could shape outcomes. That is not unique in any army. It is simply more visible in a system that distributes prestige through paperwork. In the meantime, the campaign continues. Kirkenes is liberated as the German withdrawal proceeds. The broader operation that becomes known as the liberation of Finnmark begins in the days following. Soviet and Norwegian forces take ground in the county. British and Canadian naval units provide support offshore. The war in the far north does not end overnight. German units withdraw deeper into Norway. Scorched earth destruction leaves civilians without homes and without transport. For the Allies, every kilometre gained in Finnmark reduces a threat. German air and naval activity in the far north becomes harder to sustain without forward ports and dumps. Supply lines lengthen. Bases are abandoned. The northern pressure on Arctic routes eases. This is not a single event that changes everything. It is the kind of cumulative attrition that wins campaigns. Chechulin's regiment is moved after the operation. Units gather in Belomorsk. Awards are issued, a banquet, a concert, speeches. For men who have lived on short rations and constant risk, even small ceremonies matter. Chechulin receives the Order of the Red Banner. He is promoted. His war does not end in the Arctic. He continues into later campaigns, carrying the Arctic experience with him. The Il-2 he left at Lake Senegresvanet does not disappear from history. It remains where it sank. In later years it is raised from the lake. It is restored. It becomes a museum piece in Kirkenes. In that museum setting, the aircraft is often viewed as a symbol of liberation, a symbol of sacrifice, a symbol of Soviet presence in Norway. But the more accurate meaning is narrower and more human. It is a reminder of how operations were actually flown, with minutes counted, with fuel margins that could vanish under wind and damage, with an aircraft built for punishment, yet still vulnerable to distance and cold. It also points to an unglamorous truth about war in the far north. Supply is decisive. A depot is as important as a gun. A drum of fuel can matter as much as a bomb. A bridge can be worth more than a hillside. On 22nd October 1944, a pilot went out to destroy a bridge. He returned only as far as a lake. His forced landing did not read like victory. Yet in the logic of the campaign, it became part of the map. It drew attention. It revealed movement. It contributed to the discovery and destruction of a small German supply cache at a moment when German retreat depended on such caches. Small actions rarely come with clean labels. In this case, the label came later, in the shape of a recovered aircraft, a physical object that sits in a museum while the reasons for its landing are spoken in calm, measured lines. A Soviet pilot flew with almost no fuel margin because the plan required it. He landed in hostile territory because the margin disappeared. And the place where he landed became, unintentionally, a marker for the German logistics that the retreat could not protect. If detailed, restrained war history matters to the viewer, and if the human limits behind operations are worth remembering, subscribe to the channel and follow for more forgotten stories from the war's least forgiving fronts.